June 3, 1980, 02:26 a.m., North American Aerospace Defense Command, Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Colorado. The klaxons began wailing at precisely 02:26.14, their ear-splitting shriek echoing through the reinforced concrete corridors carved 2,000 feet into solid granite. On the main display screen in the NORAD command center, a map of the Soviet Union filled with red dots, each one representing an incoming ballistic missile. Major Brian Stivers, the duty watch officer, felt his stomach drop as he read the display. 200 Soviet submarine-launched ballistic missiles, launch points, Arctic Ocean, North Atlantic, North Pacific, all trajectories converging on the United States. Estimated time to impact, 18 minutes. Stivers had been a missile warning officer for 6 years. He had participated in dozens of exercises simulating exactly this scenario. But this was not an exercise. The display showed actual alert status. The computer systems, representing billions of dollars of the most sophisticated early warning technology ever created, were reporting with absolute confidence that the Soviet Union had launched a nuclear first strike against the United States. At 02:26:47, 33 seconds after the initial alert, the warning escalated. The display updated. Not 200 missiles, 2,200 submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Every Soviet submarine-launched ballistic missile in the arsenal, fired simultaneously from multiple ocean locations. Major Stivers picked up the red telephone, the direct line to the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon. His voice was steady, trained by countless drills, but his hand shook as he held the receiver. "This is NORAD. We have a valid strategic missile attack warning. Multiple SLBM launches detected. Over 2,000 inbound." At the Pentagon, the duty officer immediately activated the klaxon system. Within seconds, the alert reached Strategic Air Command headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska. Bomber crews sprinted to their B-52s. Minuteman missile crews in silos across Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming went to launch readiness. Nuclear submarines on patrol received flash messages to assume launch positions. The protocol was automatic, rehearsed thousands of times. Upon confirmed detection of a Soviet nuclear strike, American forces had approximately 10 to 12 minutes to launch a retaliatory strike before Soviet warheads destroyed American ICBM silos and command facilities. The doctrine was called launch on warning, and it meant exactly what it said: detect the attack, confirm it, and launch before the incoming weapons arrived. What none of the officers initiating this cascade of nuclear war preparations knew was that the Soviet Union had not launched any missiles. Not one. The 2,200 submarine-launched ballistic missiles that NORAD's computers detected with absolute certainty did not exist. The most sophisticated early warning system in the world, designed to prevent surprise nuclear attack, was about to trigger the very war it was designed to prevent. And the cause of this near apocalypse, the single point of failure that brought humanity to the brink of extinction, was a computer chip that cost 46 cents. To understand how a component worth less than $1 nearly caused World War III, one must understand the system it was part of and the context in which that system operated in June 1980. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, was established in 1958 as a joint U.S. Canadian organization tasked with detecting and warning of attacks against North America. By 1980, NORAD operated the most extensive and expensive early warning network ever created, a globe-spanning system of radars, satellites, and computer systems designed to provide strategic warning of Soviet missile launches. The crown jewel of this system was the NORAD Command Center, buried 2,000 feet inside Cheyenne Mountain. The facility was designed to survive a direct nuclear strike. The command center itself sat on massive steel springs, isolated from the surrounding granite to withstand the seismic shock of nearby nuclear explosions. The complex housed 15 three-story buildings inside the mountain, connected by miles of tunnels. It had its own power generation, water supplies, and air filtration systems capable of protecting personnel from radiation, chemical, and biological attacks. The nerve center of NORAD was the Space Defense Operations Center, where giant display screens showed the status of every missile, satellite, and aircraft tracked by American sensors. The room was designed like a theater, with tiered seating facing the displays. On any given shift, 30 to 40 officers and technicians monitored the screens, watching for the first signs of Soviet aggression. The computer systems processing the data were IBM 427 mainframes, state-of-the-art in 1980. Each system contained approximately 40,000 integrated circuit chips, millions of transistors, and miles of internal wiring. The computers processed data from multiple sources: early warning radar installations in Alaska, Greenland, and England, satellite sensors in geosynchronous orbit detecting infrared signatures of rocket launches, and over-the-horizon radar systems detecting missiles in flight. When all these systems agreed that a missile launch had occurred, when multiple sensors confirmed the same information, when the computers calculated trajectories and impact points and found them consistent, the system generated a strategic missile attack warning. The confidence level in such warnings was considered absolute. The chance of a false alarm that passed through all the redundant checks was calculated at less than 1 in 10 million. This confidence in the system's reliability made the June 3, 1980 incident far more dangerous than it would have been with a less trusted system. Officers receiving the warning had been trained to trust the computers. When NORAD's system said 2,200 missiles were inbound, protocol demanded immediate action, not skeptical analysis. The specific computer system that generated the false warning on June 3rd was the NORAD Attack Warning and Assessment System, part of the 427L system that had been operational since 1963 and continuously upgraded over 17 years. The system's purpose was to integrate data from all warning sensors and provide commanders with a unified picture of any attack. The technology involved was extraordinary for 1980. The 427L system could track 1,000 objects simultaneously, calculate their trajectories in real time, predict impact points within seconds, and display all this information on screens updated 10 times per second. The processing power required exceeded anything in commercial computing. Each IBM 427 mainframe cost $7.3 million in 1980 dollars. But the complexity of the system created vulnerabilities. With millions of components, any single failure could potentially cause catastrophic errors. Engineers had designed extensive redundancy and error checking to prevent single points of failure. Every calculation was performed by multiple computers and cross-checked. Every sensor input was verified against other sensors. The system was considered fail-safe. On June 3, 1980, that confidence would be tested in the most terrifying way possible. The shift that night was routine. Major Brian Stivers had been on duty since midnight. The previous shift had passed without incident, as had the previous week, the previous month. In 17 years of operation, the 427L system had never generated a false strategic missile attack warning. Minor alarms, yes. Satellite re-entries occasionally triggered brief alerts until operators confirmed they were not missiles. Weather phenomena sometimes caused radar false returns, but a full strategic warning involving thousands of missiles had never occurred outside of scheduled exercises. At 26:14, the alarm system activated without warning. No preliminary alerts, no gradual escalation. Instantly, the displays showed a massive Soviet attack in progress. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Boggs, the senior watch officer, ran to Stivers' console. "Confirm the alert," he ordered. Stivers checked his displays. 200 SLBM launches confirmed, multiple submarines, Arctic and Atlantic launch points, system confidence, 100%. Boggs felt his training take over. Emotion was irrelevant. Protocol was everything. Notify NMCC, alert SAC. I want satellite confirmation in 60 seconds. The notification went out at 02:26:47. At the Pentagon, Brigadier General Robert Basley, duty officer at the National Military Command Center, received the alert and immediately initiated the Missile Attack Conference, a dedicated phone line connecting NORAD, the Pentagon, Strategic Air Command, and the White House Situation Room. This is NMCC. We have NORAD reporting inbound SLBM attack, awaiting satellite confirmation. At Strategic Air Command Headquarters in Omaha, General Richard Ellis, commander of SAC, was woken by his aide. Sir, we have a valid missile warning. NORAD reports over 200 Soviet SLBMs inbound. Ellis was on the phone to his command post within 15 seconds. Alert status? Sir, all bomber bases are launching. Minuteman crews are at launch readiness. We have 12 minutes to impact if the warning is valid. At 02:27:35, 81 seconds after the initial alarm, the displays updated. The number jumped from 200 to 2,200 missiles. Colonel Boggs stared at the screen in disbelief. The entire Soviet SLBM fleet, every submarine, firing everything simultaneously. It made no military sense. Soviet doctrine called for holding forces in reserve. No war plan involved firing the entire submarine fleet in the first minutes. But the computers were certain. Confidence level, 100%. All redundant systems agreed. Satellite sensors confirmed launches from multiple locations. Trajectory calculations showed impact points across the United States. Every verification check was passing. Get me satellite visual confirmation, Boggs ordered. I want eyes on those submarines. The satellite data took 40 seconds to retrieve and process. At 02:28:15, 2 minutes after the initial alarm, the answer came back. Sir, satellite infrared shows no launches, no thermal signatures. Oceans are clear. Boggs felt his heart rate begin to return to normal. Confirm that. 0 launches? 0, sir. Satellites show no Soviet submarine activity. The contradiction was absolute. The computers reported 2,200 missiles in flight. The satellites reported 0 launches. One system was catastrophically wrong. At 02:28:43, Boggs made a decision that would save hundreds of millions of lives. He picked up the phone to the National Military Command Center. NMCC, this is NORAD. We assess the missile warning as a false alarm. Repeat, false alarm. Satellite infrared shows no launches. Something is wrong with our systems. At the Pentagon, General Basley received the message with profound relief. Confirm you are assessing this as a false alarm. Confirmed. We have a system malfunction. Stand down, alert forces. The order went out at 02:29:01. Strategic Air Command began recalling bombers. Minuteman crews stood down from launch readiness. Nuclear submarines returned to normal patrol status. The crisis had lasted 2 minutes and 47 seconds. But for those 2 minutes and 47 seconds, the United States had been preparing to launch approximately 1,000 nuclear weapons at the Soviet Union in response to an attack that did not exist. The investigation into what caused the June 3rd false alarm began within hours. A team of IBM engineers and NORAD technical staff descended on the NORAD command center to examine every component of the 427L system. The stakes could not have been higher. If the system could generate such a catastrophic false alarm once, it could happen again. And next time, the decision-makers might not have enough time or information to recognize the error before launching retaliatory strikes. The initial investigation focused on the obvious, software errors. The 427L system contained approximately 200,000 lines of code, any one of which could contain bugs, but comprehensive code analysis found nothing. The software had functioned exactly as designed. The next suspect was sensor errors. Perhaps the satellites had malfunctioned, sending false data that the computers interpreted as launches, but sensor logs showed normal operation. The satellites had not detected any launches, real or imaginary. The false data was coming from inside NORAD's own systems. For 3 days, engineers traced data paths through the computers, searching for the source of the Phantom missiles. They replicated the conditions of June 3rd, running test after test. Nothing generated the false alarm. On June 6th, 3 days after the incident, a junior technician named David Carter noticed something odd in the system logs. The false missile data had appeared in a very specific location in the computer's memory, a buffer used for training simulations. This buffer was supposed to be isolated from the operational system, accessible only during scheduled exercises. Carter brought this to the attention of senior engineer Robert Henderson. Together, they traced the memory pathways. What they discovered was both technically simple and horrifyingly dangerous. A single integrated circuit chip, a component designated IC5B in the technical documentation, had failed. The chip was a multiplexer, a device that routes data from multiple sources to different destinations. In normal operation, it kept training simulation data separate from real-world sensor data. When it failed, it began routing simulation data showing massive Soviet attacks, into the operational processing stream. The chip was manufactured by Texas Instruments. It contained 46 transistors. Its function was basic by computer standards, act as an electronic switch, directing data flow based on control signals. It had cost the government 46 cents when purchased as part of a bulk order in 1974. This 46-cent component, one of 40,000 chips in the system, had failed in exactly the way that defeated all the redundancy and error checking built into the NORAD systems. Because the simulation data looked identical to real sensor data, the verification system saw nothing wrong. Multiple computers processing the same false data all reached the same false conclusions. The redundancy that was supposed to prevent single points of failure instead amplified the error. Henderson's report to NORAD leadership was blunt. A component failure costing 46 cents came within minutes of causing a nuclear war. The redundancy in our systems is meaningless if a single chip failure can inject false data that all redundant systems will process identically. The immediate response was to replace every multiplexer chip in the NORAD systems, approximately 2,800 components. But the deeper problem remained: how to prevent similar failures in systems containing millions of components. On June 6th, while investigators were still analyzing the chip failure, a second incident occurred that demonstrated the systemic nature of the problem. At 03:38 p.m., the NORAD displays again showed a Soviet missile attack, this time reporting 2,220 inbound missiles. The alert lasted 18 seconds before operators, still traumatized from the June 3rd incident, immediately checked satellite sensors and confirmed the warning was false. The investigation found an identical chip failure in a different computer. 2 IC5B multiplexer chips had failed within 3 days. Statistical analysis suggested that dozens more might be on the verge of failure throughout the NORAD systems. The crisis revealed a fundamental flaw in the philosophy of nuclear early warning systems. Engineers had designed for reliability and redundancy, creating systems that could survive component failures and still function correctly. But they had not adequately designed for the scenario where a failure injected plausible but false data into the system. A simple component failure that made calculations wrong would be caught by redundancy checks. But a failure that made false data look correct was nearly impossible to detect automatically. Only human judgment, the decision by Colonel Boggs to trust satellite sensors over computers, had prevented catastrophe. Senator Gary Hart, who chaired the Senate Armed Services Committee's investigation into the incident, summarized the danger in testimony. "We learned that our nuclear war systems, designed to prevent surprise attack, can themselves become the source of that attack through technical failure. We came within minutes of launching World War III because of a 46-cent chip." The broader context made the June 3rd incident even more dangerous. June 1980 was a period of heightened Cold War tensions. Soviet forces had invaded Afghanistan in December 1979. The US had boycotted the Moscow Olympics. Relations between the superpowers were at their worst point since the Cuban Missile Crisis. If the false alarm had occurred during an actual international crisis, decision-makers might not have had the time or calm to recognize it as an error. The investigation revealed that similar false alarms had occurred multiple times in the previous years, but had not been publicly disclosed. On November 9, 1979, NORAD systems had shown 2,200 Soviet missiles inbound. That alarm had been caused by a training tape accidentally loaded into the operational system. On March 15, 1980, less than 3 months before the IC-5B chip failure, a software error had generated false missile warnings for 6 minutes before being corrected. These incidents, combined with similar false alarms in Soviet early warning systems, revealed that both superpowers were operating nuclear arsenals on hair-trigger alert, with early warning systems that could fail catastrophically. The margin for error was measured in minutes, and the consequences of error were measured in hundreds of millions of lives. Dr. Bruce Blair, a former Minuteman missile launch officer who became a nuclear weapons expert, analyzed the June 3rd incident years later. "What terrifies me is how close we came to launching not because of malice or aggression, but because of a technical failure so minor that the investigators initially missed it, a 46-cent chip. That's all that stood between normal operations and nuclear war." The timeline of what would have occurred if Colonel Boggs had not questioned the warning can be reconstructed from military protocols and decision-making procedures documented in declassified sources. Minute 0:02:26.14. NORAD systems detect 2,200 Soviet SLBM launches. Alert transmitted to NMCC. Minute 1:02:27:14. National Military Command Center convenes missile attack conference. President Carter would be woken and moved to command aircraft. Minute 3:02:29:14. SAC bombers airborne. Minuteman crews complete pre-launch procedures. President receives briefing. Minute 5:02:31:14. President has decision point. Launch American ICBMs now to ensure they survive Soviet first strike, or wait for more confirmation and risk losing them. Minute 7:02:33:14. Under launch on warning doctrine, decision would likely be to launch. Authorization codes transmitted to missile crews. Minute 9:02:35:14. First American Minuteman ICBMs launch. Approximately 450 missiles, carrying 1,350 warheads, begin their 25-minute flight to Soviet targets. Minute 11:02:37:14. Soviet early warning satellites detect American ICBM launches. Soviet leadership has 15 minutes to decide response. Minute 15:02:41-14. Soviet leadership, believing they are under attack, orders launch of remaining strategic forces. Approximately 800 SS-17, SS-18, and SS-19 ICBMs launch, carrying 4,000 warheads. Minute 30:02:56:14. First American warheads impact Soviet ICBM fields and command centers. Soviet leadership casualties likely exceed 90%. Minute 32:02:58.14. First Soviet warheads impact American ICBM fields and command centers. American leadership on command aircraft, but ground-based command destroyed. Minute 60, 03-26-14. Approximately 5,000 nuclear weapons have detonated across the Northern Hemisphere. Immediate casualties exceed 200 million. Fires burning in hundreds of cities are generating smoke plumes visible from orbit. Day 2, nuclear winter effects begin as smoke reaches stratosphere. Global temperatures start dropping. Month 1, global agriculture collapsing from temperature drop and radioactive fallout. Mass starvation beginning. Year 1, estimated 2 to 3 billion dead from direct effects, radiation, starvation, and disease. Human civilization as it existed in 1980 has collapsed. This timeline represents what 2 minutes and 47 seconds of human judgment prevented. From 02-26-14, when the false alarm began, until 02-29-01, when Boggs declared it a false alarm, the world balanced on a knife edge between business as usual and apocalypse. The responses to the June 3rd incident were extensive, but revealed the difficulty of making nuclear command systems truly safe. NORAD replaced thousands of chips, redesigned data processing protocols, and added more layers of human verification. But the fundamental problem remained. Any early warning system fast enough to provide strategic warning would compress decision time to minutes, leaving little room for verification. The Department of Defense commissioned a study on false alarms in nuclear warning systems. The classified report, portions of which were declassified in 2010, found that between 1977 and 1984, NORAD systems generated 1,152 preliminary warnings of missile attacks. Of these, 1,152 were false. Not a single real attack occurred, yet over 1,000 alarms were triggered by technical failures, operator errors, and system malfunctions. Most of these alarms were resolved at low levels before reaching senior commanders. But approximately 30 alarms were serious enough to alert the National Military Command Center. Of these, 3, including the June 3rd incident, were serious enough to place strategic forces on alert. The Soviet Union experienced similar problems. On September 26, 1983, just over 3 years after the NORAD incident, Soviet early warning satellites reported American Minuteman launches. That false alarm was caused by sunlight reflecting off clouds at a specific angle. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, the duty officer, chose to report the warning as a system malfunction rather than a real attack. His decision, like Colonel Boggs's, saved the world. These incidents revealed that both superpowers were operating nuclear arsenals under conditions where technical failures could trigger war. The early warning systems designed to prevent surprise attack had become the greatest danger to global survival. In 1985, following several years of false alarms and near misses, the United States and Soviet Union established the Nuclear Risk Reduction Centers, dedicated communication channels for clarifying ambiguous situations. The Moscow-Washington hotline was upgraded with more reliable technology. New protocols were implemented, requiring multiple forms of verification before strategic forces could launch. But the fundamental vulnerability remained. As long as thousands of nuclear weapons sat on high alert, ready to launch within minutes, the possibility of accidental war through technical failure could not be eliminated. The engineers who investigated the June 3rd incident were particularly disturbed by one finding. The IC-5B multiplexer chip that failed had been operating within normal parameters for 6 years. It had passed all diagnostic tests. There was no indication it was about to fail. It simply failed, suddenly and completely, in exactly the way that defeated all safeguards. Robert Henderson, the lead investigator, wrote in his final report, "We cannot prevent component failures. We cannot predict them. We cannot test for all possible failure modes. What we can do is reduce our reliance on automated systems for decisions that could end civilization." The June 3rd incident proved that human judgment must remain in the decision loop, even when computers are certain. The irony was not lost on military planners. The early warning systems existed because human reaction time was too slow to respond to surprise attack. But those same systems compressed decision time to the point where human judgment became nearly impossible. The solution to one problem, insufficient warning time, created another problem, insufficient decision time. Senator Hart's Armed Services Committee hearing in August 1980 focused on this contradiction. In testimony, General Russell Dougherty, former SAC commander, stated, "We have created a situation where our survival depends on making correct decisions in minutes, based on information we can't fully verify." The June 3rd incident demonstrated that our systems can be wrong with absolute confidence. That should terrify everyone. The public reaction to news of the false alarm was muted. The Carter administration released limited information, describing it as a technical malfunction that was quickly resolved. The full extent of how close the United States came to launching a nuclear war was not disclosed until years later, when participants began speaking publicly. For the officers who lived through those 2 minutes and 47 seconds, the memory remained vivid decades later. Major Brian Stivers, in a 1995 interview, recalled, "I was certain the world was ending. The displays showed 2,000 Soviet missiles. Every system confirmed it. We were following protocol, doing everything right, preparing to launch our own missiles. If Colonel Boggs hadn't questioned the computers, if he had trusted them absolutely the way we were trained to, we would have started World War III over a 46-cent chip." Colonel Boggs himself rarely discussed the incident. In a brief statement years later, he said, "I made a judgment call. The satellite data didn't match the computer warning. I chose to trust the satellites. I was lucky to be right. But analysis of the decision suggests it was more than luck." Boggs had enough experience to recognize that a simultaneous launch of 2,200 missiles didn't match Soviet doctrine. He had enough confidence to question the computers despite their certainty. And he had enough time, barely, to check alternative data sources before protocol would have required launching American missiles. Any one of these factors missing, less experience, less confidence, less time, and the outcome would have been different. The legacy of June 3rd, 1980, extends beyond the specific technical fixes implemented. It demonstrated that in the nuclear age, the margin between civilization and apocalypse could be measured in cents and seconds, a component worth 46 cents, a decision made in 167 seconds. These were the factors that determined whether hundreds of millions of people lived or died. The incident also revealed the limits of technology in preventing nuclear war. The most sophisticated, most expensive early warning system ever created, designed by the best engineers, protected by redundancy and error checking, had failed catastrophically. Not because of enemy action or sabotage, but because a single component had failed in an unpredictable way. This understanding gradually changed nuclear policy. The hair-trigger alert status that had seemed necessary in the 1980s was recognized as more dangerous than the threats it was designed to counter. By the 1990s, both the United States and Russia had taken steps to reduce reliance on launch-on-warning doctrines. Decision times were lengthened, verification procedures were strengthened, the number of weapons on high alert was reduced, but the fundamental vulnerability remained. As of 2025, approximately 1,800 nuclear weapons remain on high alert, ready to launch within minutes. The early warning systems are more sophisticated than in 1980, but they remain vulnerable to technical failures, cyber attacks, and human error. The possibility of accidental nuclear war through system malfunction has been reduced, but not eliminated. In 2010, on the 30th anniversary of the incident, a symposium at the Brookings Institution examined what lessons could be learned. Former Secretary of Defense William Perry, who had dealt with nuclear war planning throughout his career, summarized the enduring danger. The June 3rd incident proved that we cannot build perfect systems. We cannot eliminate the possibility of catastrophic technical failure. Therefore, we must build systems that allow time for human judgment to correct technical errors. Launch on warning is incompatible with this requirement. As long as we maintain launch on warning capability, we remain vulnerable to accidental nuclear war. The statistics of what was prevented on June 3, 1980, tell a story that transcends the technical details of chip failures and computer errors. Date of incident, June 3, 1980, 02:26:14 to 02:29:01 a.m. Duration of crisis, 2 minutes 47 seconds, 167 seconds. False alarm, 2,200 Soviet SLBM launches. Actual launches, zero cost of failed component, $0. 46 American strategic forces alerted, 1,000 Minuteman ICBMs, 600 strategic bombers, 41 SSBNs. Time from warning to required launch decision, approximately 8 to 10 minutes. Officer who recognized false alarm, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Boggs. Key decision, trust satellite data over computer warning. If false alarm had not been recognized, American ICBMs that would have launched approximately 450 missiles. American warheads that would have been used, approximately 1,350 Soviet response. Launch approximately 800 ICBMs Soviet warheads that would have been used. Approximately 4,000 total nuclear detonations in first hour. Approximately 5,300 immediate casualties. 200 to 300 million total deaths within first year, 2 to 3 billion global population in 1980, 4.4 billion percentage of humanity that would have died, 45% to 68%. The cost-benefit analysis is staggering. A 46-cent component failure came within minutes of causing damage measured in trillions of dollars and billions of lives. The return on investment of the few seconds Lieutenant Colonel Boggs took to verify the warning before authorizing retaliation exceeds any calculation in human history. In the final accounting, June 3, 1980, stands with September 26, 1983, Stanislav Petrov, and October 27, 1962, Vasily Arkhipov, as one of the three closest approaches to accidental nuclear war in the Cold War era. Each incident had different causes: a multiplexer chip failure, satellite sensor error, and submarine depth charging, but all shared common features: technical systems generating false warnings, protocols demanding immediate response, and individual officers making correct decisions under extreme time pressure. The 2017 documentary, The Man Standing Between, interviewed surviving officers from all three incidents. The consensus among them was sobering. Colonel Boggs stated, "We were lucky 3 times. Petrov was lucky, Arkhipov was lucky, I was lucky. We were all fortunate to have enough time, enough information, and enough clarity of mind to make the right choice. But luck runs out. Eventually, someone will face a similar decision without enough time or information, and they will make the wrong choice. Then it will be too late." The 46-cent chip that nearly ended the world was preserved and is now in the National Museum of American History at the Smithsonian Institution. The display placard reads, "Texas Instruments IC5B multiplexer chip removed from NORAD computer systems, June 1980. This component's failure generated a false warning of Soviet nuclear attack, bringing the United States within minutes of launching retaliatory nuclear strikes. Cost, $0.46. Tool. Visitors often stand before the display in silence, contemplating how something so small and inexpensive could have such catastrophic consequences. The chip itself is unremarkable, a black plastic square roughly 1 centimeter on each side, with 14 metal legs. Nothing about its appearance suggests the power it briefly held over human destiny. But that is the lesson of June 3rd, 1980. In the nuclear age, the fate of civilization can rest on components measured in cents and decisions measured in seconds. American generals were shocked when a 0.46 computer chip nearly launched 2,200 nuclear missiles. They were shocked that their sophisticated, redundant fail-safe systems could fail so completely. They were shocked that they came within minutes of ending the world over a technical malfunction. What shocked them most, perhaps, was the realization that it could happen again. That the next chip failure, the next sensor error, the next unpredictable malfunction might occur when there wasn't enough time to verify, when the officer on duty didn't have Boggs's experience or judgment, when the decision had to be made in seconds rather than minutes. The American generals were shocked, and their shock was justified. Because the world had survived not through superior technology or perfect systems, but through luck and the clear thinking of one man who chose to question computers that were absolutely certain they were right. The chip failed. The computers lied. The protocols demanded launch, and Lieutenant Colonel Charles Boggs said no. Not yet. Check again. Verify. Those few seconds of skepticism, that insistence on verification despite the urgency and certainty of the warning, saved the world from a 46-cent apocalypse.